Hello and welcome to Alan History Nerd. In this video I'm going to look at the fall of Boris Johnson and how he fell from being leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister. Having said that, as I make this video, he is actually still in number 10 as the Conservative Party goes through the rigmarole of electing a new leader. Once they've gone and finished doing that, I'll make a video reflecting on that bit as well. So all of this I'm going to try and relate to the A-level politics spec, but essentially what I want to do is give a kind of an overview of what happened. And I'm going to start at the end, which might not make the most sense, but I just want to kind of start with Johnson's resignation in his own words, and then go back and look at the story, just in case not everything he says is true. Right, so Johnson resigned, and he said the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new prime minister. He talked of his successes electorally and in office. So the success of the mandate. He talks about this gigantic, massive mandate that he won in 2019. He talked about this in fairly personal terms. He then talks about all the successes of his government have taken place since. And in this, he largely focused on the Ukraine, vaccines, getting Brexit done, the same old things that he's been going back to. He continued to push the levelling up agenda, which is obviously one of his key policy areas, and his view of a very positive future for Britain. This kind of endless kind of positivity is maybe one of the main things that led to Johnson's rise, and it is still there evidence on the day he resigns. It's quite a peculiar thing about Johnson. He never seems to get downbeat about anything, and he never seems to admit fault or defeat, really. He goes on to say that he thinks things aren't as bad as his cabinet colleagues seem to think so. He talks about the big majority, the fact that they're not far behind in the polls, and that being behind the polls as a government is kind of normal in the middle of a term. And then there was this kind of really telling phrase that he said, where he said that the herd instinct is very powerful. Now, this was a rather damning kind of comment on his Conservative colleagues, where they, like a herd of animals, like a herd of sheep, had kind of all run in a particular direction for no particular reason. But once some people started going, everybody else followed. So it kind of portrays it as a kind of puzzling action to take place for no apparent reason. Whilst obviously there were lots of reasons why such an extensive number of his cabinet colleagues and backbenchers had turned their back on him, but he doesn't seem to acknowledge any of that at all. Again, his positivity talks about the brilliant Darwinian system, which is the process by which the Conservatives choose a new leader, a system he's obviously in favour of, as last time it was used, they chose him. I think there's a warning in there as well. The idea that this is Darwinian is that we are going to see survival of the fittest. We are going to see the Conservative Party candidates fighting against each other, and blood will be spilled, and this could well, and I think is proven to be so damaging to the Conservative Party. He mentioned the idea of tax cuts, which many have seen as the dig at Rishi Sunak, and then he finished with a slightly odd phrase for a prime minister who has a classics degree and tends to go back to kind of more literary or classical references, where he just finished with "them's the breaks." And so in this, there is no apology or indication that he made any errors, told any lies, that there was any good reason at all why his parliamentary colleagues would be turning their back on him or turning against him. So he kind of seems to portray the reason for his resignation is a kind of unexplainable loss of faith from the members of the cabinet and the parliamentary Conservative Party, something that is without reason. What we're going to go on and do is look at the reasons that they had. So Johnson didn't give us any reasons why he fell, or no real plausible ones. So why did he fall? Well, actually, there'd been very long-term doubts about Johnson's honesty and integrity. Now, I'm going to go through a list of this. It's quite long, and this has led to lots of questions about, well, how does he end up as leader in the first place, and why didn't he fall earlier, rather than really puzzlement about why he eventually falls. So we can go all the way back to his time as a journalist. His first ever front page story. He then got sacked because there was a quote that he used that he'd made up. There's a much played taped conversation with him talking to somebody else about getting a journalist beaten up, which only really hasn't become something more serious because the journalist didn't get beaten up. There is the numerous acts of infidelity, and then it's got very strong allegations about him trying to get paid posts, etc., for those he was sleeping with. There's been the kind of ongoing question mark and almost become a source of humour, really, about, well, how many children does the Prime Minister have? And there never seems to be an absolutely clear answer to this. Again, linking to the above point with the infidelity. There was the lie on the side of the bus. I think that during the Brexit campaign, with the claim about the amount of money that it was going to save the UK, which was pointed out at the time, and many have been talked about a lot since, about the fact that that figure was just simply inaccurate. There was the attempt to change the parliamentary standards to save Owen Paterson from suspension, which then led to a U-turn, which then led to a by-election loss, losing the seat in North Shropshire, which had been a Conservative Party seat for 200 years. We then have all the stuff with Partygate, which has been kind of in an endless cycle in the news. It ends with Johnson being charged by the police, following his countless denials that there were any parties, that there was any wrongdoing, that he didn't know about it, that he wasn't there, but he was there, and he was charged. And again, many Conservatives turned against him at this point because of the endless lies in terms of what had gone on. And there's the whole issue with the potential breaking of international law over his own Brexit deal with the Northern Ireland Protocol. There was the financial scandal over who paid for the decorating of his flat, and again, it was found that he had been far from straightforward and honest about this. There's been various scandals over meeting with Russian oligarchs, potential funding. We had the Lebedev getting a lordship. We saw lots of scandals over PPE contracts given out by Boris Johnson's government. There's ongoing investigations linking back to Partygate and other things about whether he has misled Parliament. There have been two by-elections fairly recently fought following MPs resigning, one being convicted as a sex offender, the other who was on 2 occasions watching pornography in Parliament, and the Conservatives lost both these by-elections. So we're getting a bit here about integrity and moral standards within Boris Johnson's party, control in number 10 with all the partying going on. So he either was complicit or he was complacent and incompetent in terms of controlling it. And then all these other scandals. In the past, and this is why people started to think that kind of Johnson was bulletproof or made of Teflon, that everything's to slide off him. Just one of these things would probably have been enough in the past to bring a prime minister down, but Johnson just kept on going. And then we get to the straw that broke the camel's back, and this is the Chris Pincher scandal, and it was yet another scandal that followed on from the others. And again, it might seem slightly odd. There's been plenty of stuff where Johnson has been the party misbehaving. And in this one, the party that's been behaving very badly is Chris Pincher, according to the allegations, both of the event that led to his initial stepping down, and then the allegations that have then come out of lots and lots of previous offence. Again, Johnson comes across as having been either one of dishonest or having poor judgment, or both. Again, he seemed determined to bluster on, denying, then deflecting, and then offering some form of apology. But this time, he didn't survive. So Pincher stands accused of groping the two men whilst very drunk at the Carlton Club, and again, this led to a whole kind of categories of kind of missteps by Johnson and Number 10. So I'm going to go through a timeline of exactly what happened. So on the 30th of June, Pincher resigned as Deputy Chief Whip following the sudden breaking story of his actions, and there was, according to the Conservative Party, going to be no further action taken against Chris Pincher following this. Then on the 1st of July, more allegations emerged. Number 10 said Boris did not know about specific earlier allegations against Pincher before he was appointed him as Deputy Chief Whip. Pincher was suspended from the Conservative Party. So we've very rapidly moved on from there will be no further actions, and then it emerged that this wasn't an isolated incident, that stuff like this had happened before. And there was suggestion that Johnson knew about it. He goes, no, Johnson didn't know about it. On the 3rd and the 4th of July, we see ministers, including the Working Pension Secretary, Therese Coffey, the Education Minister, Nadhim Zahawi, and Minister for Children and Families, Will Quence, repeating the line that Johnson knew nothing about the previous allegations and actions taken against Chris Pincher. And that this was not a story, and essentially the media should stop digging on this and concentrate on more important things. Then, on the evening of the 4th of July, the BBC reported that Boris did know of the complaint against Pincher in 2019-20, that it did lead to disciplinary action, and the line from Number 10 moved from didn't know to, he had been aware, but he forgot about it, which is probably one of the most unconvincing lines I've ever seen come out of Number 10. Now, there's a real problem in all of this, in that Johnson not only is not telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, but also essentially he's sending out his own cabinet ministers and making them look like fools because they are denying something, saying it isn't true when it was. And just like before on Partygate, when he said, trust me, these things weren't going on, and the members of cabinet had gone out and said, well, he says nothing, there were no parties, so I'm standing by him, there were no parties, and it turned out there were parties, that he was at them, that he got the fine from the police. And here again, this is going to really stretch the tolerance, the patience, the willingness to stay in post of members of cabinet. The really, really kind of destructive blow for Boris Johnson on the 5th of July was delivered by Lord Macdonald, a former permanent secretary of the Foreign Office, who published on Twitter a letter he had sent to the Parliamentary Commission for Standards that read, the original Number 10 line is not true and the modification is still not accurate. These words really condemned Johnson and Number 10 and what they were doing. And this whole question of integrity, which for a whole variety of events and reasons that I've talked about before, was hanging over Boris and the whole thing with Partygate and the broad anger about that amongst the British public and within the Conservative Party. Obviously, we'd seen him win the vote of no confidence, but have a substantial amount of his party, over 40% of his own parliamentary party, vote against him. And now here he was yet again, doing something that suggests he didn't have the integrity to be Prime Minister. Johnson calls a cabinet meeting. It's the weekly cabinet meeting. He talks about delivering a big tax cut. Later, Sajid Javid quit, having lost confidence in the Prime Minister and questioning his integrity. Rishi Sunak then quit, citing differences on policy, we believe largely linked to tax policy, and calls for Johnson to go grow amongst Tory backbenchers. And there's talk about possibly changing the rules on the 12-month wait on a new vote of no confidence. And could this be changed? And there's elections coming up to the 1922 committee, and people are saying, well, I'm going to change that. We need another vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. On the 6th of July, there were over 12 resignations by 9 a.m. and they just kept coming through the day. We now know that Gove advised Johnson in private that he should resign. Boris later sacks Gove, and number 10 sources describe Gove as a snake. Boris is determined to fight on. In PMQs, Starmer calls the whole stuff that's going on the first recorded case of the sinking ship fleeing the rat. But possibly more cutting was a question from Tory MP Tim Lawton, and echoing a question that many who follow politics and many in the media were asking already. Does the Prime Minister think there are any circumstances in which he should resign? Following Prime Minister's question time, Javid delivered a speech which again attacked Boris's integrity, whilst also acknowledging some of his successes. The speech went down very well on the Conservative benches, which again was a massive worry for Johnson, and started to suggest that his position was completely untenable. There was people shouting out "Bye Boris" at the end as the parliamentary business finished. So everything's in a terrible position of flux at this stage. Johnson is grimly holding on. The momentum seems very much against him. Right, so we go on to the 6th of July. The resignations continue coming. There's been about 40 by 6 p.m. Johnson is definitely trying to fill all these various positions within government ministries. We get to the stage where the Education Ministry has no ministers at all. In the middle of the marking period for A levels and GCSEs, and with results upcoming, we see Durries and Rees-Mogg continuing to defend the defiant Boris, and there are others who defend him as well. But as the 6th of July ends, everything is looking fairly grim, and there is starting to be talk in the media about the potential of some kind of massive constitutional crisis. I mean, what happens if the Prime Minister won't resign? Are we going to have to wait for another vote, a change in rules from the Conservative Party and a Conservative Party vote of no confidence? Are we going to see a general election? Are we going to see the Labour Party pull the trigger on a vote of no confidence and Conservative MPs reluctantly vote for it as it's the only way to remove Johnson? None of that came to pass, because the next morning, the 7th of July, about 5 a.m., we are told Johnson finally started to realise it was over. By 9 a.m., resignations from the government had hit 60, including the Education Minister, Michelle Doylan, who was in post for the grand total of 35 hours. And news started to spread that Johnson would resign, and later that day he did. So this idea of there being a herd mentality, that there been no reason behind the mass resignations and the loss of support from the parliamentary party, quite simply wasn't true. There was reason why the cabinet turned on him, and this was because, again, he'd been shown to be less than honest. The backbenchers, over 40% of whom were already turned against him because of things like Partygate, even more changed because of this. And a lot of them had been holding out and giving him the benefit of the doubt, to quote Javid, and other things for a great long period of time. They had seen him as an electoral asset. They no longer did. They saw him as electorally toxic. And the 3 recent by-elections would very strongly indicate that, with the Conservatives losing seats that they never ordinarily would, even in a by-election. So what can we learn from all of this? Well, first of all, the Prime Minister cannot govern without the support of their cabinet. Johnson seemed to be giving it a go for a couple of days, but essentially, as more and more ministers resigned, then we could see his position was untenable. I think maybe one thing that many students of politics might also realise from all this is just quite how many government jobs there are. I mean, and Johnson lost more members of his government to resignation than any Prime Minister had ever done before. In fact, in the last couple of days, he beat every Prime Minister ever, I think. May had a startling high number of resignations in her time in office, but that still was only 40. and Johnson went past 60 in two or 3 days. Now, we also see some really important things in this in collective ministerial responsibility, and the fact that it will break if ministers are sent out with inaccurate accounts and made to look foolish. So it's all well and good kind of defending a decision if you'd argued against it, etc., etc. But if you are being given just incorrect information by the Prime Minister and his office and sent out to the media to defend it, then people aren't going to stand for this. This is going to break down collective responsibility. People aren't going to be willing to work to go and be a spokesperson for a government headed by a Prime Minister who sends them out with that kind of duff information. We saw stuff on individual ministerial responsibility, again with resignations citing the idea of integrity and not in good conscience being able to carry on. It showed us that a Prime Minister with a big majority is still vulnerable if they lose support of their backbenchers. If you are not an electoral asset, your days are numbered, essentially, is the message from what has happened to Johnson. Here, both the party and the parliament seem to be more powerful and more important than the Prime Minister, because the parliamentary party could remove Johnson, and if the Conservative Party hadn't done it themselves, it was starting to look like that Parliament as a whole would. The Conservative Party essentially decided really that Johnson in a lot of ways was not conservative enough, and we're seeing quite a lot of this in the race to be the new leader. Although there haven't been kind of significant attacks on Johnson by those running, they have talked a lot about issues surrounding integrity, honesty, rule of law, things that traditionally the conservative ideology and Conservative Party would say that they were kind of cornerstones of their beliefs and their way of doing things. And here Johnson seems to be out of step with the party, and so there's a kind of talk of a reset of bringing those values back. And judging by the stuff that they then really have been arguing about is about how high the tax threshold has got under Johnson. Again, this being seen as something that doesn't fit with modern day conservatism, particularly with the new right. Now, the other thing that this shows us is that, oh, hello, Thomas. The other thing that this shows us is that even Boris Johnson is not politically bulletproof. Now that we've seen examples of both sides of the Atlantic of politicians who just seem to, for periods of time, be able to get away with anything. So we've had Boris Johnson, the Americans had Trump. Now, so Johnson eventually, there was too much and he fell. He, like Trump, however, hasn't accepted responsibility or that he himself had done anything wrong. He's talking about other forces having essentially forced him out. And he continues to receive a great deal of support as the cat makes its way back again. Notably from the right-wing press, such as the Daily Mail and the Express. Boris here seems to see himself as having a personal mandate. It was the 14 million people voted for him rather than for their constituency MPs, and he seems to want to act in a presidential style. Now, the media seem to like presenting UK politics as this, as it being Johnson versus Corbyn and then Johnson versus Starmer, and it's all about the leaders and it's presidential like, and then there's just these little people in the background who are other members of cabinet and other MPs, and they don't really matter as much. Well, as much as the media likes to present politics this way, and as much as Johnson might have thought of politics in this way, it is simply not the system that we have. It is not how politics works in the UK, and this has been absolutely demonstrated by the fall of Johnson, that prime ministers aren't like presidents. They can be brought down from within their own party. So that has been kind of really interesting, and the stuff particularly on collective and individual ministerial responsibility is really interesting. That relationship between cabinet and prime minister. We talked about presidential prime ministers like Thatcher and Blair in the past, and Johnson was starting to look like one, but ultimately the prime minister needs cabinet, and if he doesn't have cabinet support, if they don't have cabinet support, then they are not going to survive. Right, so this links to lots of stuff as I've talked about. It links to the concept of ministerial responsibility. There's a link, a code for a video I've done on that. It links to Prime Minister and Cabinet, and again, more kind of exam specific stuff. There's a video that I've done on that. And it links to other things along the lines of Conservative ideology and the Conservative Party. There's loads of videos on Conservative ideology and a video on the Conservative Party as well. But a particular video I've done is one that asks the question, is Boris a Conservative? And I think really that is something else to reflect on in the fall of Boris Johnson. So what is a Conservative? What do the Conservatives stand for? And I think that's something that we'll see change and maybe be re-established as the new leader emerges over the next few months. So thank you very much for watching. I hope that's been helpful to everybody. And again, we definitely live in interesting times, as the old proverb goes. And I'm sure there will be more exciting stuff to come. And I will try and keep abreast of it and make links to help you with your studies, or just your general interest in politics. If you liked this video, then please hit like. If you have any comments or questions, then please add them below. If you haven't subscribed to Alan History Nerd, there's loads of good stuff on here on politics and history, so please do subscribe and check out other bits of the channel. You can also find us on TikTok now. Thank you very much for watching.